Chapter 6 Afternoon Shadows. Evan didn't want to stop. He and Pete were fixing the holes in the roof. Pete was outside up on the extension ladder ripping up shingles and tossing them through the hole to Evan. Evan was inside, crouching under the sloping ceiling so that he could catch the shingles as they fell and heave them into the garbage barrel. He also had to hand Pete whatever tools he needed. So when Mrs. Tresky appeared in the doorway of Grandma's office construction site and asked Evan if he would please take Grandma for a walk, he made a face and said, "Can't Jessie do it?" Evan, kneeling under the hole, looked up and caught sight of Pete's face looking right back at him. Pete didn't need to say a word. He just shook his head once, and Evan knew that was that. "Yeah, okay, Mom," said Evan. He stood up and wiped the grit from the knees of his pants. "I'll be back in a few minutes," he hollered up to Pete. "I'll be here," Pete called down. "Same as before. Take care of your grandma, Biggie." Evan followed his mother, scowling. Why can't Grandma take a walk by herself? Grandma was a nut about walking. She took long walks by herself every day. Sometimes she'd walk 5 miles circling her property, which covered 100 acres at the foot of Black Bear Mountain. "Evan, please," said his mother, in the voice she used that meant there would be no more discussion. Evan walked into the mudroom just off the kitchen. Grandma was looping her new purple scarf around her neck, the one that Jessie had knit for her for Christmas. Her injured arm was tucked inside her bulky winter coat, which was zipped closed over it. "Hey, Grandma," said Evan. "Something tells me you don't feel like going for a walk right now," said Grandma. Evan bent over his boots, tugging them onto his feet and hiding his face. Was it that obvious? The memory of what his grandma had said to him 2 days ago in the kitchen flickered in his brain, but then he remembered his mother's explanation. "She's not herself, Evan." "No, I want to go," he said, knowing that it was okay to fudge the truth when you didn't want to hurt someone's feelings. "It's just that I was helping Pete, and he kind of needs me right now." "Pete's a good boy," said Grandma. "Boy," said Evan. "He's a grown man." "Not to me. Everyone looks young to me." Grandma used her mouth to hold a mitten still while she wriggled her good hand into it. "Ready?" "Ready," said Evan. Grandma opened the back door and was just about to step out when Evan's mother called from upstairs. Evan tromped up to the second floor, feeling hot and puffy in his heavy ski coat and boots. "Evan," said his mother, "try to make it a short walk, okay? Grandma thinks she's back to her old self, but I don't want her getting too tired, and try to hold on to her good arm if she'll let you, or at least keep close to her so if she trips you can grab her before she falls, okay?" Evan didn't like the sound of any of this, but he nodded his head. He wasn't used to taking care of his grandma. She had always taken such good care of him and Jessie. "And Evan, one more thing," said Mother. Don't let her go near the bell, okay? I don't want her. Just keep her away from that hill, okay?" Afternoon shadows came early to Grandma's woods because the sun set behind the mountains. Evan was surprised that the blue-gray light of late afternoon was already painting the snow. He turned to walk up the long plowed driveway toward the main road that would be a good half-mile walk. But Grandma said she wanted to walk a different way, through the woods. She set out on the path that headed for the foot of Black Bear Mountain. There were footprints in the snow along this path and the steady, slicking marks of skis. So Evan knew that Jessie and Maxwell had already come this way today. Evan talked about the repair work that he and Pete were doing, especially the thrilling part about ripping out the old scorched studs in the wall and putting in new ones. It had been tricky because the wall they were working on was a load-bearing wall, which meant it was holding up a lot of the weight of the second story. If they took out too many studs at once, the house could collapse. Evan thought it was like playing Jenga, the game where you build a tower of blocks and try to pull out each block without causing the tower to fall. Grandma didn't say much. It took some effort to walk in the packed snow, and there were branches and rocks you had to watch out for. Evan could feel his heart beating fast with this effort. and the cold intake of each breath of frozen air made his breathing even seem heavier. He thought about Pete up on the roof all afternoon and wondered how he did it. Grandma, you want to go back to bed now? Go back now? The light was definitely fading, and they'd already been walking for 15 minutes. Evan wasn't even quite sure where they were, but Grandma knew her property like the back of her hand. Grandma shook her head but didn't say anything. Her breathing was louder now, and she was grunting a little with the effort of climbing uphill. It was a pretty big hill, and the snow seemed deeper here. Evan looked around. There was something familiar about this place, but the light was so soft and lavender that he couldn't really trust his eyes. They were just reaching the top now, Grandma ahead of him by a few feet, and as the crest of the hill came into view, Evan felt a sudden sense of coldness and dread. Usually they came up this hill from the other side, but it was still the same hill, Lovell's Hill, the one with the bell. There was the wooden crossbeam, and just like Jessie had said, the bell was gone. Grandma, let's go back now, said Evan, afraid but not sure of what, which just made the fear feel all the worse. But Grandma wasn't stopping. She made a beeline for the bell, or at least where the bell should have been. Evan felt as though he had never seen a space so empty as a place where the bell was supposed to hang. When she reached the wooden crossbeam, Aunt Grandma stopped. She looked around and then looked back at the empty space. In the dim light, Evan couldn't see her face very well, but what he saw frightened him. She didn't look like his grandmother. She looked strange, with one arm missing inside her coat and the empty flopping sleeve hanging like a dead fish. Her knitted cap was crooked on her head, and one strand of gray hair hung down and curled around her neck. Her eyes were searching for something, but the dying light made it harder and harder to see. Evan looked around to try to understand what she was looking for, but the thick blanket of snow seemed to transform every rock, every tree, every shape into something else. It was hard to make sense of any of it. Did you take the bell? Asked his grandmother sharply. No, said Evan. Where is it? What have you done with it? I don't know, Grandma. I didn't do anything with it. Give it back, right now. It isn't yours to take. I didn't take it, said Evan, his panic growing. He had to figure out some way to get Grandma home, but when he took a step forward, she backed up and nearly fell over. Evan froze in his tracks. Who are you? She asked angrily. Grandma, it's me, Evan. Thief, you're a bell thief. Grandma looked at the crossbeam again and then at the sky. Evan tried desperately to think of how he was going to get Grandma home. She was tired. She was cold. He could see that now. He had to figure out how to take care of her. But he couldn't think. Should he leave her here and go get help? Should he try to force her to go home? How was he going to get her to safety without hurting her? Grandma, it's me, Evan. I'm your grandson. I need to get you home, okay? Again, Evan took a step toward her, and this time Grandma did fall over backwards, trying to move away from him. She landed, sitting down in the soft snow, her bad arm still tucked inside her coat. Evan didn't think she was hurt, but the fall seemed to frighten her even more. She looked at Evan as if he had pushed her down, even though he was standing 10 feet away. Stay away, she said. You won't get away with this. She looked around her again, and she said, Where's Susan? Evan didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to say. The truth made no sense as long as Grandma didn't know who he was. He tried to think. He tried to imagine what it must be like to be his grandmother right now. Finally, she said. Finally, he said, Susan sent me. Mrs. Joyce. She asked me to bring you home. She's waiting for you at home. Evan waited to see how she would respond. Good, said Grandma. I need to speak with her. There's been a problem, a very big problem, but she didn't seem to remember what the problem was. Can I help you up? Asked Evan. He didn't move toward her. Yes, help me up. Then take me to Susan. I need to speak with her. Evan slowly walked over to his grandmother and helped lift her to her feet. It was hard to get her up, and he could feel his muscles straining, but he was able to do it. "What's your name?" asked Grandma, straightening her cap on her head. Suddenly, Evan recalled a character in a story that he and Jessie had made up when they were younger. Grumpminster Fink. At, at your service, madam. He crooked out his arm. "That's a very strange name," she said. But she took hold of his elbow, and slowly they made their way down off the hill, out of the woods, away from the falling night, and into the warmth and brightness of the house.